Session blood.
Alright, hello everyone. So today we've got something pretty cool for you all. We've got Wesley, who's one of our viewers on YouTube, who commented after listening to something we said about Ranger, thinking we were a little bit off on our analysis of the class. And to be honest, we're definitely not always right. We just sort of try and give our best impression of what direction we think classes are going in. And Wesley's been nice enough to showcase his deck today. So today's matchup, we've got Karol on Brute, and we've got Wesley on Ranger. So we're just going to have a quick look at the sideboards first. So we see Karol has taken out the Arg Smash, makes sense, Ranger doesn't run items, Boneheader Barrier, not that great against single source damage. The Drone of Brutality, it's not really a fatigue style game. Then most of the other stuff, we've got Equipment here, which isn't very good against Ranger. The Energy Potion doesn't block, and Time Snaps don't block, and Tome of Farndale blocks for 2. So we may see Karol going for basically a strategy that he can get through the Ranger's big turns and just sort of grind him out a bit. Okay, so Wesley we see, okay, so interestingly he's taken out some of the defense reactions, things like Take Cover and Sink Below. Sometimes against Brute you like to have defense reacts, particularly against cards like Barraging Beatdown that punish you if you don't block with at least 2 cards. So when you have a defense react, it allows you, if they intimidate 3 cards, to go defense react plus card in hand. And Feign Death makes sense since Brute, I mean, sometimes they get multiple actions, but usually not. And he's taken out Tunic. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this game. And we'll see how it goes. Okay, so first thing we see a Vest of the First Fist. Okay, now I believe the players may not have shuffled their decks. It's just an easy mistake to make. Usually quite easy to tell because it's all in alphabetical order. Okay, so I believe Wesley may be starting. So he's got the Ravenous Rabble, 2 Enlightened Strikes, and a Pathing Helix. Karol, on the other hand, has a Barraging Beatdown, the Bloodrush Bellow, Reckless Swing, and Drone of Brutality. Okay, so we're going to see him kick things off with a Ravenous Rabble here. Taking 1. Now if we see an Enlightened Strike for 7 here, we may see Karol look to block with the Bloodrush Bellow and then use a Reckless Swing for some free damage. Okay, so we see the Pathing Helix come out through Death Dealer, which actually sets up a nice sort of nimbleism Pathing Helix play. Okay, well just the Enlightened Strike, or potentially for 5 or 7. Okay, so I really like the sequencing there. It allows them to get through some extra damage. And we see Karol get the Reckless Swing for the 2 damage. So we see Wesley's elected to go for the extra damage rather than Arsenal card, which in Ranger, when you want to be using Death Dealer quite a lot of time, seems fine to me. Okay, so it looks like Karol's got the Command and Conquer here, which again isn't as effective. Due to the lack of Arsenal card. So Karol's chosen to go on for the Smash Instinct here. So that allows him to set up the Command and Conquer, which is quite good against Ranger, particularly with things like Goliath Gauntlet to get some tempo. I thought he might look to Arsenal the Sink below, but by doing it this way, it allows him to effectively use his whole hand and Arsenal the Command and Conquer. Okay, so we see a classic aggressive Ranger play of just taking the damage. So we might see him pitch a Yellow Razor to Death Dealer here, still leaving him one resource for Red and Ledger. And we see he's drawing the Red Razor Reflex. Okay, so he's played, looks like he's played the Nimblism. And see a Ledger for 8. And now he's also got the backup of the Razor here, so this could potentially be for 11. So Karol plays it safe and blocks out for 8 damage here. And now we see it allows Wesley to get that Promise of Plenty in the arsenal, which is actually a really cool card for Ranger. Oh, and here we're going to see the power of the Command and Conquer for 8. So because of Wesley's hand, he's got 3 cards that block for 2 and a Remembrance. So he actually is not able to block that. Because the Erase Reflex blocks for 2, the Rabble blocks for 2. So it's a bit unfortunate for Wesley he drew that Remembrance here. It's a card that a lot of Ranger players play, and you don't have a weapon, so you don't want to fatigue out. You want to make sure you can play your best arrows repeatedly, but because of that 0 block, it can be a bit awkward sometimes. And it looks like he may elect to take the full 8 damage here. Okay, so that makes his next turn a little bit tougher. So we could see a Rabble with a Razor to at least push some damage through. But already we've seen Brute take a significant life lead here. So that's a Rabble coming through for 3. And because of that go again, we'll see what Karol chooses to do here. Okay, so that's... Oh, so there we see the double Red Razor. So that's really good. So Wesley there, he's taken a turn that was looking a bit rough into something pretty good. Pushed through 9 damage on that turn. Okay, so Karol may be looking to go for a Pack Hunt Pummel here. He would have preferred to have the blue card, allowing him to pitch that and then have Tunic up for the Pummel. Because if he wants to Pummel here, he's going to have to use the Tunic and pitch the red card in his hand. Now, Ranger's often a deck that you don't really want to block with. You just want to pump through a lot of damage. Because if he does block for one card with one card here, and Karol gets the pummel off, that's really going to make it difficult for him to do much on his turn. And here we see the pummel come through. So we've got a pretty fast-paced game so far. But again, I'm liking the fact that this Ranger deck's pretty resilient because we still can see a Rabbit Travel into a Coke's turn, threatening potentially 8 damage with a Promise of Plenty into Arsenal. So you see a Ravenous Rabble come down for 4. Now it'll be interesting to see how Karol blocks out this Coax, if he's worried about the on-hit effect, or if he prefer just to block for 3 and save his equipment. Because he probably doesn't want to block with 2 cards, because I'm thinking he wants to just pitch a yellow, attack with a club, and set up the Springboard Somersault. Okay, so it looks like he's chosen to take it. Both players have gained 1 life. And both players drawing a card. Okay, I'm not quite sure about the scalers there because that's an attack reaction. I may have missed him sequencing it. Okay, so we've seen him pop both the equipment, allowing to Death Dealer into a second shot. Because both players did draw a card, this does allow Karol to block this out and just take 1 damage. And I believe the... So chosen to play the Promise of Plenty. So that means if he hits and gets a card into Arsenal, he may just wish to use it right away. I believe Karol may block this one out here. Okay, so Wesley did manage to push some damage through, but that was at the cost of both his equipment, and there is still a 7 life lead. Okay, so we see Karol opting to go a bit more aggressive here. He probably thinks because he has a lead, if he can force a 2-card block out of Wesley's hand, that... I mean, if he chooses not to block, that's a lot of damage. Averaging beatdown giving +3. So it's potentially coming in for 7. And I think Karol's happy here, if Wesley does choose to block with 2 cards, as it really kind of shuts down the options for next turn. Okay, so you see the double block there. Okay, so a few options here. We're going to see the... Okay, we've seen him pop the Bullseye Braces, which puts a card into his Arsenal and Arrow and gives a +1. So it looks like Wesley here has been pretty keen to Arsenal that Plunder Run. Okay, now we might see the exact same play from Karol here. So he's going to go for the Barraging Beatdown into the attack for potentially 7. And this time it will allow him to get that Springboard Somersault into Arsenal. It's the power of Ranger that we see that even if he does choose to block with 2 cards here, he should be able to get a decent turn off next turn. I mean, unfortunately, if he does block with 2 cards and chooses to go something like Plunder, Run, Knock, it would only be for a 0-cost arrow, but that's probably going to be good enough anyway, something like a Pathing Helix. Now fortunately for Karol, he's got the Springboard Somersault to shut down that turn a little bit. Okay, and we see the Plunder Run. So for the viewers wondering why the things like the Plunder Runs are going to the graveyard straight away, I know in some of our gameplay videos we usually leave it out in the combat chain just for sort of to make it a little easier to follow, but technically when you're playing on attack actions they go to the graveyard immediately. Okay, so now we see Not the Death Whistle used, which allows a guaranteed Azalea. So that's an Endless Arrow coming in for 7, and if it hits it draws a card. So we might see if Karol wants to use one of his defense reactions plus Somersault, which would allow him to play the blue beatdown and attack for 6, but he might just be thinking it's best to save them. Okay, so we see the sink below, and we'll see if he uses the ability here. Yeah, so often it's quite nice to have defense react in Arsenal against Ranger. Because Karol did have the 2 defense reactions there, I think he was happy to give them up to sort of keep the aggression on. So I think this is really showcasing the power of single barraging beatdowns. Sometimes you think of beatdown as that card that you want to sequence sort of 2 or 3 of them into a big alpha rampage, intimidate the other player's whole hand, or at least 3 cards, to get the guaranteed effect. But often it's just as good to play a single beatdown and really put the pressure on the opponent to block out with 2 cards. And we do see that, so he's chosen to take the 6 damage here. Now he does have 4 red cards, but again, that's not the worst thing in Ranger. So we're going to see the Remorseless go into Arsenal, allowing him to draw a card. So now we can set up the double Nimblism. So that's going to give it +6. And this is coming in for 11 now. Now I feel Karol isn't too worried about the on-hit effect here. It depends what type of turn he wants to go for. Because if he wants to set up the big Blood Rush Bellow turn, so if he wants to sort of play the Barraging Beatdown, use Tunic for Blood Rush, and just go for it, we could see him take a lot of damage here. Okay. So it looks like he's just going to block out for 9, take 2 damage, and just play the safe game. So Karol's thought process here, I believe, is that he's got a large lead against a deck like Ranger that can have quite explosive turns and put out a lot of dominated damage from nowhere. I think he's pretty happy just to keep swinging with the club and save his defense reaction for when he really needs it. So we can see he's got that Red Faithful scene. Because Karol would be well aware that Ranger does run a lot of cards that block for 2. So if he can get through sort of 2 damage with the club every turn, or even 1 damage, he knows that that will allow him to essentially pick his spot for dealing maximum damage. Again, it's very tempting not to block on a hand like this, because we see the Scar for a Scar, the Razor Reflex, the Ridge Rider Shot. Okay, and I'm liking those yellow Razor Reflexes. Because for yellow pitch and Ranger, it's quite nice being able to pitch one to Death Dealer, put an arrow in, and still have the resource up for either a combat trick or to play your one resource arrow. Meanwhile, we do see Karol has that big Alpha Rampage set up, but we'll see what he chooses to do with it here. Yes, it looks like he's happy to take the 4 damage coming up from this, but I think he's going to be a little bit wary of taking the damage if another arrow comes through. So the promise of plenty here, with the potential back of a Razor Reflex, is really powerful. Because it would allow him to put a card into Arsenal. Okay, so he chooses not to do it here. It does have go again anyway. So the Coax of Commotion gets Razor Reflex to get through 2 damage. So it looks like the modes are +1 life. And we may see players draw a card. Okay, looks like there was a slight miscommunication there. Okay, so that Remembrance into Arsenal actually isn't the worst thing here, because if Karol's going for the big Command and Conquer with the Lunging Press for that sort of surprise extra damage, it won't have that extra kick of taking out the Arsenal card if Wesley just wants to play the Remembrance in response. The issue is here that Command's secondary effect, it is relevant, but just the raw damage itself is starting to become the big issue here. So this is actually quite a difficult block, because if you block for 2 and take 4 damage here, that's a lot of life. Okay, so we see the block for 7. And Karol's going to put that Barraging Beat down into Arsenal to set up his next turn. So this does allow Wesley to use the Cross Wrap if he chooses to do so on the Remembrance, or he can simply throw out the Snatch and force a block. So we see Wesley having a quick look through his graveyard here. So it looks like he's wanting to use that Remembrance. So he throws out the Snatch first so he can keep that card in Arsenal hidden. So Karol looks like he might take the damage here. So the reason he's probably not too worried about Snatch drawing a card here is because he wants to get value out of that Command and Conquer. With no card in Arsenal, it kind of loses a bit of its punch. And we see Wesley here, I believe he played the Remembrance before the Snatch trigger goes off. So that allows him to put sort of three good cards back into his deck, so maybe he's thinking he wants to draw one of those, give himself a higher chance of drawing something like a Red in the Ledger or a Remorseless, and then put it in Arsenal to set up for next turn. So that's quite cool to see. You know, that's just a small value play that can really make a difference sometimes. And unfortunately he's drawing the second Remembrance. But again, this does kind of... Okay, so Remembrance technically should be banished. It's probably not super relevant here, but just a note for the viewers. Well, we see Karol. Is he going to go for the Scabskins? I mean, if he gets 2 action points here, it's huge. Ooh, and he does. Okay, so we see him lead with the Command and Conquer. So what he might be trying to set up here is to force multiple blocks on the Command and Conquer. That means he can follow up with a Barraging Beatdown from Arsenal. So if Wesley blocks with 2 cards here, it allows him to get the full damage from the Barraging Beatdown. And here we see the Lunging Press, and Karol's probably going to be a little frustrated to see that it's a Remembrance. So yeah, so he's blocked out. Now because he has 2 cards in hand, the Beatdown is going to intimidate 1, and that means the club's going to come in for the full 7. So this is going to put Wesley in quite a tough spot here, because our club's going to get through for 5 damage and leave him with 1 card in hand. And 2's a bit of a magic number against Brute, because Reckless Swing deals 2 damage. I believe Karol only runs 2, and he's used 1, but it does give him that option to close out the game with Reckless. And it also just makes it a bit more difficult with your blocks, because, you know, something like a Pummel is just going to instantly win you the game if they block incorrectly. Oh, you know, I forgot he took 1 damage, so yeah, this Barraging Beatdown is going to be brutal. Interesting note here, I believe if he'd pitched the Lunging Press for the Command and Conquer, he actually could have got lethal damage there by going Barraging Beatdown pack up. Ooh, okay, we're going to see a pretty rough turn coming up here. So Massacre is going to intimidate. Okay, no, sorry, it doesn't work with the Bellow. But we're going to see a double intimidate here from a Beatdown plus Bloodrush Bellow, I believe. If he chooses to go for it, he may play it safe and just play a single Beatdown. Or not at all. This is why Karol's a Brute player, not me. I don't see all the angles that he does. Okay, so this is intimidated 1 card. Okay, now this is going to be rough. So Karol's going to be able to pitch Barraging Bighorn to play another Bighorn, and this is going to intimidate twice, which I believe is going to be lethal damage. So Massacre has that effect that if it's discarded to pay a Brute action, it intimidates again. So this Barraging Bighorn is coming in for 9 here. Okay, so it looks like that's the game. Now, decks like Brute can be quite difficult for more aggressive decks. They tend to have good matchups against decks like Ninja as well. Decks with a Barraging Beatdown really sort of pressures you to block with 2 cards or take a lot of damage. So they're able to play quite defensively with their defense reactions when they need to, and then just constantly chip away at the club, either with just the club or a single Barraging Beatdown. Then once the life totals start to get a bit lower, they can really sort of turn the corner in a way and just switch up their strategy and choose their spot to take damage to start rolling out some really big turns. But I did like the very aggressive nature of that Ninja deck, of the Ranger deck there. So we saw, despite the fact that Karol had a large lead, Wesley was able to come up with some big turns just with 2 or 3 cards. The use of the equipments early did, I think, cost him a little bit late game. It meant his turns weren't as flexible in a way. But I can see in a deck where you're quite far behind and you see an opportunity to sort of steal the tempo back, that you want to go for it. I do wonder if perhaps the siding out of the defense reactions there proved a little bit costly. I don't play a whole lot of Ranger myself, but I just know against Brute, sometimes they're pretty key. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. That was Ranger vs Brute, and thank you to our players.
Session Blood.